on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m, it's Boxing Day. Coming up on tonight with the show, me, Josh Howe, we have In My Boxing Day Opinion. I'll be talking about the lazy left and how they may need to start reading stuff rather than just assuming they're on the right side of history. We have former BBC Royal correspondent Michael Cole will be joining us to share the latest royal gossip and his thoughts on the new BBC documentary taking us behind the scenes of the coronation. Film director and friend of mine, Gary Senior, will be in the studio for an open interview about his career and the latest developments after BA have recently issued him an apology. And I'm very lucky to be joined by a wonderful Christmas-ish panel of Linda Duberly, Benjamin Butterworth and Hilary Freeman. Happy Boxing Day, everyone. This is GB News Tonight with Josh Howe. Let's do this. And thank you for joining us. Please let us know how you've been celebrating Christmas so far, and have you been splashing the cash on any sales in store or online today? Email me now at gbviews@gbnews.com. See you after the headlines.
Josh, thank you very much. 1 minute past 9. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Storm Garrett set to batter Britain overnight, bringing strong wind, rain and snow. The Met Office has issued several yellow weather warnings from midnight into the early hours on Thursday. Gusts between 50 to 70 miles per hour will sweep across the country, with high ground and exposed coasts being hit the hardest. Most of England and Wales will see torrential rain, whereas the peaks of Scotland and the Northern Isles are likely to see some of that snow. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following a fatal stabbing in Croydon. 27-year-old Michael Patrick Afonso Peixoto died after being attacked and stabbed by a group of men in Thornton Heath on Tuesday, the 19th of December. The investigation is ongoing and a 22-year-old remains in custody. The Met Police are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. 4 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a man was stabbed in East London today. The Met Police say officers were called to reports of a stabbing in Hackney. A 49-year-old man was found with stab wounds and later died from his injuries. 2 men aged 49 and 42 and 2 women aged 35 and 44 have all been arrested. They remain in police custody. Labour has been warned to stay away from traditional Boxing Day fox hunt parades ahead of the next general election. Countryside campaigners have told the party to end what they call its running attack on rural communities. They say Sir Keir Starmer risks igniting a toxic culture war if his party repeats past attacks on rural life. Fox hunting was banned in England and Wales in 2004. However, Labour has vowed to crack down on all hunts. A major study suggests vitamin D deficiency, depression and diabetes are among a number of health issues that can increase the risk of young-onset dementia. The findings suggest targeting health and lifestyle factors could reduce the risk of the condition. Researchers have identified a number of risk factors for that condition, which is characterised by the appearance of dementia symptoms before the age of 65. They say the findings challenge the idea that genetics are the sole cause of the condition. And finally, Queen Camilla hosted afternoon tea at Windsor Castle today for a girl with a brain tumour. The little girl, who spent most of her life on chemotherapy, sang a Christmas song and gave the Queen a handmade ring. Olivia Taylor has a brain tumour which has left her blind, but she leapt up to say hello, Your Majesty, as she met Queen Camilla. The 7-year-old also tried her very first cup of tea, which was poured by the Queen. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now back to Josh.
Thank you, Tatiana. As it's Boxing Day, our national holiday devoted to lazing about in our underpants, I thought it might be appropriate to send out into the world a little message in a bottle to my fellow travellers on what I call the lazy left. Not that I expect many, if any of you, to actually be watching this live, but maybe it'll be clipped up and the random algorithmic currents of social media will drift it up upon your digital shores. Now, the reason this doesn't apply to any of you watching this live, wherever you are on the political spectrum, left or right, is because by virtue of your presence, you've already illustrated a willingness to engage and question and be open that eludes my target audience for this message. So feel free to give yourself a little congratulatory pat on the back. And just for reference, where am I on the political spectrum? Well, it depends on who you ask. Isn't that how it works nowadays? I consider myself left-wing, but those a bit further to my left would say that I'm a centrist. The far left call me right-wing. And I reckon most of you are probably centre-right, which, according to those same people, makes you Nazis. Whereas the far right call me a Marxist. The thing is, to my understanding, traditional politics at its simplest level comes down to how to distribute resources fairly. And I'd argue fairness is that most quintessential of British values. Just look at our reverence for queues. Why? Because they're a particularly singular representation of fairness, and woe betide anyone who dare break that societal contract. I'm looking at you, Holly and Philip. What that all means then is that our different positions on the political spectrum is determined by what precisely we, as individuals, consider fair. Is it fair that a young man can illegally come over here from a safe country and be housed for free in a nice hotel whilst a British homeless person shivers in the street? Is it fair that a family who helped our country and have been tortured because of that are at risk of being murdered because they have no legal route to asylum here? Is it fair that for some people to cynically exploit the benefit system and not contribute to society? Is it fair that the benefit system doesn't properly provide a safety net for someone who's worked their entire life? Is it fair that foreign companies can buy our country's assets, plunder wealth from them rather than investing, and British citizens are forced to pay more for substandard services because they have no alternative? Which is why I think the water companies and rail companies should be renationalised as soon as possible. I know, how dare I have such a disgusting far-right position? Now, with that understood, let me lay out my message then to any left-wing people watching this output for the channel from the first time. As a fellow lefty, here's my insight into what I've learned my last 2 years inside the belly of the beast that is GB News. Everyone's pretty nice. That's it, there we go. I have attended marches against Nigel Farage, but then you meet him and you know what? He's a charming, polite guy. Ditto Jacob Rees-Mogg. I doubt we're going to be popping out for a pint, but on the left, you build up these people to be the devil. And when you actually engage with them, when you actually listen to their positions, for the most part, they're just people who have a different idea about what's fair. Now, that doesn't mean I agree with them on many issues. I fundamentally disagree. But I do think that they are being fair. And here's the thing. Those people on the right, perhaps because they've been told that they're the baddie, have to read more and they have to think more, which makes them very good at justifying their positions. Whereas we on the left, because we tell each other And this message is backed up by most of the media and cultural institutions that we're the good guys. And if we're the good guys, you know what? We don't need to read and think and justify. We just assume that we're right. And that was me, right? I'm being a hypocrite here. I was on the left. I didn't need to think. Whatever position my fellow political travellers took must be the right one. I didn't need to read or think until suddenly I did. When anti-Semitism started cursing through the mainstream left via Corbyn's Labour, I knew that that just wasn't right. And most of the left ignored it or just flat out denied it because, hey, we're on the left. It's impossible for us to be wrong or worse, racist. So I had to go away and read and learn and argue and persuade. And then when I realised that the left could be so fundamentally wrong about anti-Semitism, if just by virtue of being on the left doesn't make you automatically right, what else could the left have got wrong? And I started seeing mostly left-wing women, mostly lesbians, being on the receiving end of outrageous abuse and even violence because they didn't want biological men in their spaces. But wait, they're left. The left were going, these women, they're actually bigots, they're transphobes, they're TERFs. So I read and I learned and I listened, I made up my own mind. Now, of course, it's fair for trans people to be treated with respect. But is it fair for female prisoners to have to live with biological male rapists and in some cases even be sexually assaulted by them? Is it fair for female athletes to train their entire lives and lose to biological men who only recently were mediocre male athletes? The Achilles heel of the left, which far-left cranks and gender ideologues and critical race proponents and whatever else you want to loosely define under the umbrella of the culture wars or woke politics, have expertly exploited in our desperation to be the good guy and then not actually put any work in to be able to justify our positions. Apolitical issues have been made political, but anti-Semitism, women's rights, and the response to COVID and debanking and October 7th and on aren't left or right issues. You can't just go along with whatever your side tells you. You have to read and question and think and learn and decide for yourself what's fair. You have to put the work in. You have to stop being the lazy left. Because for those of us who do want and are fighting for and arguing for a better world, it's just not fair. Right, let's get the thoughts of my panel. We have journalist and broadcaster Linda Duberly. Hello. We have journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth. And we have journalist and agony aunt Hilary Freeman. Benjamin, I'm going to go to you first because I remember watching you online and sort of screaming at my phone. And here we are now, a couple of years later. I believe we're friends. I like you a lot, yet we disagree on stuff.
Yeah, I think there is a temptation, and I don't accept that it's just people on the left. I think plenty of people on the right do this too.
Exactly.
Where they like to see the world along tram lines, and they decide a set of ways in which they perceive political questions, and then they adjust the world around them to fit the straight line that they've already decided upon. And I think that's the real problem that modern politics have. I spent my Christmas with what I would call gays and strays, and one of them there, middle-aged gay man, was telling me about how he'd, in the previous days, had all these arguments with his niece, who is quite left-wing and was talking about how much she hates Israel and is supporting Gaza and the Palestinians. And he was trying to say to her, but you don't understand, they would throw your uncle off a building if they got the chance. It's just not that simple. And I thought that was such a sad sort of indictment of the situation where this young person was clearly unable to appreciate the complexities. And the reason I say that is because maybe the first time that you saw me was a couple of years ago arguing with Piers Morgan about gender identity, and I haven't particularly changed my views, but I do look back on it and I realise that I sort of started with a straight line and then adjusted the arguments against it. I just sort of ignored to adjust the world around me. And I think that's a mistake that social media has whipped up in recent years, and that's the big problem with our politics.
That's interesting. I mean, Linda, you're nodding along to what Benjamin's saying here, and I agree, absolutely, this sort of cognitive dissonance is a left and right issue. I guess the reason why I specifically wanted to address the left is that the difference might be that the left feel, this is just my experience from being here, is that don't seem to put as much work into their arguments in terms of what they sort of... And I'm talking about, not because people here are engaged anyway, but I'm just talking about out in my life.
Yeah.
They're just like, I'm a lefty. I'm talking about
I think
on the
that goes
comedy
for everyone.
circuit. You think
I think
even the
that
right
goes
as
for
well?
everyone.
So
I
you think it doesn't matter?
I think so many people are really, really lazy about how they develop and formulate their opinions. They just don't get under the skin of various stories that come up. One of the problems we've got with society today is this polarisation. And it's not between left and right, it's between X view and Y view. I mean, I listen all the time on the radio, for example, to a court case that I might know quite well, that I've got some background knowledge about. And often the anchor, say it's on LBC, for example, well-known radio station, will be going hell for leather about a certain point that I know is really, really unfair because no one on that programme has taken the time and the trouble to do the actual research, get to the raw data, get to a few facts and properly construct an opinion. It's lazy people, I'm afraid, in general, left and right.
I agree with that. I mean, look, we're here as sort of the idea as, I guess, political commentators somewhat. We're more engaged than most. Do you think, Hilary, that the situation is even more exaggerated like, in people's personal lives? They're just like, I was raised like a Labour or a Tory and that's how I'm going to vote for the rest of my life?
I think people just aren't interested in facts anymore. It seems to me bizarre that I remember when the internet came about and they thought, God, you're going to have every fact in the world at your fingertips. And people ask questions or argue points that you could just Google and it would come up with a page and it would tell you all the facts and the history and people aren't interested. You try and argue with someone and you give them the facts and they're like, well, that fact goes against my opinion, so therefore...
It's not a fact.
It's not a fact. And that is the problem now. People do not accept experts, they do not accept facts. I think that's something that started happening with the whole Brexit debate.
So I do a lot of...
It became about feeling,
and I do a lot
fact.
of communications training, for example, for the emergency service, where it's really important that they get a firm grip about what's going on in the media landscape. And the problem, I said to them now, is that you've got actual conventional news gathering, which goes on. It still goes on. It doesn't go on to quite the same extent as when I was a young trainee on the Western Mail in Cardiff doing 3 years of indentures. But it does still go on. But there is wall-to-wall opinion. And opinion is not fact.
Yeah.
And now younger people have got used to this and they recite opinion as though it is fact. And when they do get a fact, they think it's a movable feast.
But also we have a problem that people think a disagreement with you makes it personal.
Yeah.
And I think
that's the other thing.
I think that's a real shame because, I'm 30, so I assume I'm the youngest person here. So maybe it didn't used to be like this.
I'm 28.
I don't I self-identify as 28. But when you say that you passionately disagree with someone, you try to argue the corner, they think it's a personal attack. And that's an utterly redundant way to go about having a democracy.
Exactly. You need to be rational. You need to have rational debate. I mean, I've got 3 kids. One of them is your age, which makes me feel really old. The other 2 are a little bit younger. But the oldest boy is an economist. And, I couldn't have a conversation with him without him looking up some stuff on his phone, sending me links, because he's trained to do it. I have the most interesting conversations with him, because it's like with Patrick Christis a couple of days ago, we were talking about young white guys getting grants because they're one of the most compromised groups in the education system in this country. Now, within days, he had gone to the Resolution Foundation, he had gone to different government departments, he'd got loads and loads of facts lined up, which gave him a really good perspective on the actual problem. And I think that's really important.
I'll just say one other thing, which is that I think we've also been rewarded, as it were, with politicians who've taken advantage of this. I think we have a problem with demagoguery. I would give the examples, some viewers might not like it, but I think Boris Johnson liked to whip up the idea that disagreeing with some of the things he did meant that you were attacking a type of person, a type of understanding of Britain and British culture. And I also think, to an even worse extent, Jeremy Corbyn did that. That's why you got this situation whereby a man who is blatantly anti-Semitic and supported by obviously anti-Semitic people was able to deny the blatant reality because any questioning of the evidence of that in front of them meant that you were no longer on the left or no longer Labour, that you weren't good enough for their purity. And I think we live in a politics of purity tests that actually is very different to how it used to be 20 years ago.
And also politicians deal with a kind of marketing speak. They go on, they get on air, they give you their soundbite, and it's not really deep enough. It's not thought out.
It's all about personality, isn't it, now? It's not about You know, you remember the days of people like Michael Foot. Can you imagine him being in politics now? I mean, he would never get anywhere.
Not sure he should have been in politics now.
However, he was, you know, he had a certain authority, a certain knowledge. It wasn't about image with him. It was completely the opposite, wasn't it?
So does anybody have an idea about how to break this, how to move forward?
Oh, it's very difficult because it's partly it's 24-hour news that's done it, partly it's social media
basically our
that's
fault.
done it. Well, I mean, we've got to get used to the fact that in this election, in particular, we are going to have to start reading manifestos. We are going to have to start understanding policies because our vote
people
will count.
taking responsibility is the point.
They have to be responsible.
Because my whole life up to this point has just been following, as we were saying, following our side. And now we have to break free of our tribalism.
Yeah.
I think you know, seriously, you've got to start paying journalists more and making journalists...
Well, you would say that, Hillary.
Yeah, well, I would say that. Seriously, there's this, you know, this idea that anyone who has a blog is now a journalist.
Yeah.
And, you know, not properly trained, just writes their opinion. And so, therefore, that means a knock-on effect is that people don't trust actual journalists who are trained and have got experience.
Yeah.
Because they see them as being the same as some blogger who's just decided to write their opinion. So I think those things, you know, would help, because if people can't afford to go into journalism because it's not a viable career that pays your mortgage, then you are just going to end up with people who just do it because they've got a trust fund.
I mean, I personally wonder if facts are going to make a comeback. If what's going... No, seriously, what Benjamin was saying, it's about people get so offended because their opinion is what's being challenged. But I wonder if now we're going to somehow get over ourselves, toughen up a bit, and finally facts might
Well, we're coming
re-emerge.
into election year.
We'll see.
We are going to have to step to the plate. Everyone is going to have to step to the plate.
But then it looks like it's going to be the dirtiest election we've ever had. The mudslinging from, you know, Labour claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't want to lock up paedophiles, them claiming that Keir Starmer, when he represented cases as a lawyer, that was somehow his personal opinion, despite that not being how being a lawyer works. This suggests that it's going to be a very ugly political
But I'm
year.
optimistic because I hope that people, as they get more and more used to this stuff and they see this stuff, they get savvier to it. I'm hoping, optimistically, that they might then actually start thinking for themselves. But we'll see. Anyway, thank you very much. We're brilliant start there. Former MP Simon Dangswick is going to join me live in the studio after the break. Don't go anywhere. See you in 2.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. It's time now for the big story. It's been reported today that the Labour Party is planning on revealing a watertight alternative to Rwanda migrant plan as outlined by the Tory government. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer will set out his vision for the country next week as his party tries to combat Tory claims that there's no plan for the small boats crisis. Joining me now to discuss this is former Labour MP for Rochdale, Simon Danzo. Hello, Simon. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy do you say Happy Boxing Day?
I think you can do. Why not? Yeah.
All right.
Happy
Well, let's go
Boxing
with that. So, Sir Keir, he's previously dismissed the Conservatives' bid to deport some asylum seekers to Rwanda, and he said it's a gimmick. But has he changed his stance now? Does this prove that, with the election less than 12 months away, that he really has to address this issue, surely?
Yeah, I think that's what this story is all about. It's a story that's appeared in the Times newspaper where it's been suggested that Labour are going to contemplate some sort of offshore processing schemes, which means that illegal immigrants, asylum seekers will be processed in a third country as opposed to being processed in the UK.
Well, that sounds exactly like Rwanda.
Well, it's very similar to Rwanda, but there are some differences in that it would be British official. This is what it says in the newspaper. I'm not convinced by all of this, but we'll come on to that. They'll be processed by British officials, and they will have the ability to come back to this country if they're found to be accepted by those officials. And that's not how Rwanda works. If you come to this country illegally, then you automatically can be sent to Rwanda, and that's where you stay, irrespective of what your status is. So it is slightly different from Rwanda. It is ironic because what's being proposed is by Labour, these processing centres in a third country, is based on David Blunkett, who used to be the Home Secretary, his proposals that he worked up when he was Home Secretary in the early 2000s. And he was going to use Tanzania as the third country. Ironically, that's next door to Rwanda. So there are some similarities. But I think this is just, Starmer is not Blunkett. Blunkett was a tough, smart, traditional Labour, old-style Labour, I would call him, though he was a sort of Blairite, but he was a very firm Home Secretary and a very different kind of politics to what Keir Starmer is. Keir Starmer is this North London, Islington Labour, very soft Labour. He's not going to do anything like what David Blunkett would have done in terms of illegal immigration.
So you just think this is all for show, then? You don't think he would actually follow through?
No, I don't think so. I think it's all for show. I think we're very unlikely to get if people are thinking of voting Labour in the hope that Labour might tackle illegal immigration, they're going to be sorely disappointed. That's my point on all of this. Generally, the Labour Party has moved to a position where they're practically open borders. They take a moral view that people should be able to come to this country, then we might decide whether they can stay or not. I support the Rwanda policy, not least because A lot of people come here, throw away the passport, destroy the passport, so you can never return them to anywhere because you don't know where to return them to. Okay. With the Rwanda policy, you can return them to, you can send them to Rwanda, and that sorts out that problem. I'm not sure this solution does sort out that.
You don't think people can do exactly the same? If they throw away their passport, they would just be sent to wherever, Tanzania or wherever. That seems to somewhat deal with the same issue, doesn't it?
Well, except I don't think this... Well, the other problem with what's being proposed in the Times is that there's a lack of detail. What would happen if somebody... And do they have to land in Britain before they are sent to Tanzania or to another third country? It's not clear about that. There's also talk about processing in some of the other European countries. All this is on the back of what Rishi Sunak was looking at a few weeks ago in Italy. So he was at a conference in Italy, he was speaking to the Italian Prime Minister. They're already looking at an Albanian solution of processing illegal immigrants in Albania. So it's not dissimilar to that. But Rishi Sunak's been looking at it as well. I mean, the good news is that both political parties are now trying to come up with some solutions.
Well, that's what I was going to say was, I mean, I know what you're saying, that maybe it goes against the ethos of what Labour stands for nowadays, but it does also feel like at some level, someone in Labour is getting it, that gets that it's an issue for the public. And just on that level alone, whether we're talking about moral issues and whatnot, it feels like that is somewhat of a progression.
Yes, no, I think you're right, and because Labour will have lots of internal opinion polling which shows that they are weak on this issue. They're always very strong on the NHS, they're weak on defence, they'll be weak on immigration, illegal immigration, and it's becoming an increasingly important topic. It's moving up from third to second position in terms of an issue that needs to be dealt with.
And you don't think that they should just stick with what is the frame of the Rwanda plan right now? Is it just unworkable for them? I mean, will they have the same illegal issues with, with the European courts?
Well, that's one of the conditions it has to satisfy, and that's why they would use British officials for processing the people. That makes it easier to be accepted legally by the European Convention on Human Rights, apparently.
OK, because I thought the issue was more that Rwanda was an unsafe country.
Yes, well, that's what's been argued. I would argue contrary. I have a house in Rwanda.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I spend a lot of time in Rwanda. I'm married to a Rwandan, and it's one of the safest countries in the world. So I think the Supreme Court's just got that wrong. I think it's a good solution to a difficult problem, actually.
OK, well, this accusation of Keir Starmer being a flip-flopper, and I guess that people can use this again as a way to attack him. There's also the other point of view that changing your mind is healthy.
Yeah, you could argue that. He has had in place a five-point plan, which is very similar to the Conservatives' policy on immigration, except it doesn't involve Rwanda, and it involves giving more money in international aid to developing countries.
But that's obviously a very long term. That's not going to deal with any issues in the next...
No, it isn't, but it's
5 years, 10 years even.
But it's part of the five-point plan. Where Starmer comes unstuck is that he has opposed every single piece of legislation over the last 4 years, which has been to toughen up on immigration. So now for him to change his tune is the people might see it as disingenuous.
Yeah. Well, it's the same you had with the trans issue, and you had with him saying, oh, well, 99% of women have penises and whatnot, and then but then I feel like democracy is in action, but in that it became such a big deal that he was forced somewhat to change his position. As you say, now whether it was polling or whether it was him actually looking at the issue closer, I guess that's the debate, whether people are going to go into this.
And whether he holds these positions once he's in government. Because I've been in the Labour Party. I'd been in the Labour Party 30 years before I left in 2017 because of Corbyn, and so I know many of the characters. And I suspect this North London Labour. It's soft left. I suspect we'll have open borders if we have a Labour government.
Is there anything that you do? Because we always talk about what's going, what the plans are, Rwanda and everything, but no one seems to have a definitive idea of what really will work. Because even with Rwanda, there's no proof that actually that will cut down. I know it's there as a deterrent, but we still haven't seen any evidence that it will work. Do you have some secret plan that you would, if you got in power tomorrow, that you would deal with the boats?
Yeah, well, I'm not a politician, so I have a luxurious position, don't I? I don't have to make these decisions. But I think we have to try Rwanda. You're absolutely right. But people say, oh, it will not work. Well, they don't know whether it will work or not. not. The idea is it's a deterrent and it breaks up the business model of people smugglers, and it will deter people from paying to come here and then to end up in Rwanda. So I think it should be tried. And if that doesn't work, I think we have to start turning the boats back, and that's what Australia did. We have to, and we have to ignore the European Convention on Human Rights. We have to do all what we can to tackle illegal immigration. The feeling in the country on this issue is massive.
I 100% agree with you. I guess it's just the difference is how we're actually going to deal with it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Boxing Day. I hope that you're recovered from Christmas. It wasn't too traumatic for you.
No, a very enjoyable Christmas Day. Yeah.
There we are. Well, enjoy your home back in Rwanda.
Yes.
You're not going back there now?
I'm there on the 2nd of January.
Oh, wow. OK, well, I'm jealous. I'll be in Norfolk. That's all right. I'll take that. Very good. Well, thank you so much. Anyway, that was former Labour MP Simon Danczuk. Anyway, coming up, former BBC journalist and royal correspondent Michael Cole joins me after the break for the latest royal gossip and special insight into a BBC show.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, a sweet moment between the Queen and 7-year-old Olivia Taylor, who has a brain tumour and was part of the choir that sang during the King's speech, has charmed the nation. Olivia treated Camilla to a rendition of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer before trying her first ever cup of tea, which was poured by Her Majesty. Well, to talk all things royal, I'm joined now by royal biographer and former BBC royal correspondent, Michael Cole. Michael, hello. Now, what do you make of that lovely moment?
Good
evening. Good
evening. Absolutely beautiful, Joshua. And of course, it was the tea party was in the White Drawing Room, which was, of course, where the Queen met Paddington Bear, which was probably the most wonderful royal moment ever captured on television. I'm sure we will remember it forever, and it will be rerun forever whenever the Queen is spoken about and anybody mentions a marmalade sandwich. But, you know, you mentioned you were going off to Norfolk. Absolutely nothing wrong with Norfolk. It's not quite as good as Suffolk, but it's a pretty good county, the royal county of Norfolk. And, of course, that's where the King and the royal family are at the moment, celebrating at what I think has been the end of a very successful first full year on the throne for the King. Whether anybody was there watching the programme this evening on BBC One, or whether they were actually playing charades instead, I don't know. But had they watched it, I think they would have been very pleased by it. What it's useful to say right from the start, Joshua, is that it wasn't a PR puff job for the royal family. It was a fascinating 1 hour and 45 minutes. And I think it was raised above that level by comments by the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. And then we see again that lovely tea party and that lovely little girl, a girl of great talent, blind from the very early age, with a brain tumour. And I think the way the Queen took her to her heart was very moving. You can't fake that. And I think it was a wonderful moment for that family and for her elder sister, who looks after her so brilliantly. And what's more, the little child can sing, and they're applauding quite rightly, and very moving. You can't buy something like that for that family from Bexley. And I congratulate the child, Olivia. There they are, an exchange of presents. And I think the child made her something in purple, a purple ring. That's right. And she gave that to the Queen. Well, she'll never forget that, or these films. And there she is going at the end of the tea party. The little child said that she now loves tea. So the Queen has ordained that she shall always have tea. And that, I think, is fantastic.
We're on coffee next. Now, with the documentary that was aired today, can we learn anything new from it?
Yeah, I think we can. I think what was fascinating was the very personal and perceptive comments by the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. Now, I've interviewed her in the past, and it's not very easy to get much out of Princess Anne. The well-worked phrase involving a stone and blood comes to my mind. But she did say some very perceptive things about her feelings when she saw the crown removed from her mother's coffin, thinking, well, that's it, it's all over. The responsibility has now passed on to the King. And what is interesting from my point of view was to see in a very real way, there we see him with the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, the affection, which is very close, affection which he didn't get a great deal of when he was a small child, and he's making sure his grandchildren certainly do get it. And I felt throughout that he was humbled, and it's not really surprising. The weight of responsibility being put not just on his shoulders, but on his head. And when he tells the Archbishop of Canterbury to ram it down on his head because he wouldn't be able to touch it during the coronation ceremony. And Welby, the Archbishop, says, I don't want to break your neck. It might spoil the show, or words to that effect. I mean, there were moments of candour and history there, things we haven't seen behind the scenes. I felt when I watched the coronation in the summer, in May, commentating on GB News, that it lacked some of the spirituality that was there in 1953 in black and white, which ushered in the television age. And when Richard Dimbleby whispered from his gallery up in the rafters, the Queen is crowned, using the historic present tense. I mean, the hairs on the back of my 10-year-old neck went up. It was a very emotional moment. But the really big difference, Josh, I think, is this. Throughout that film, the king is relaxed, he's happy, he's content, he has the top job, he knows what his job is, and he's enjoying it. He's obviously had a very, very long apprenticeship, 70 years. Obviously, he didn't want his mother.
Oh, gosh. It's cut out. It's gone suddenly. That was like the whitest house ever, and then it just went to pure red. I hope that nothing's happened to him. But actually, I wanted to ask him about Dominic West. I wanted to find out about the Crown. But there we go. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry that the internet, I guess Norfolk, you know, isn't as great after all. We're going to have a little break now, but we'll see you in a couple of minutes. We're not going to have a break. We could have...
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to GB News Tonight with me, Josh Howe. Now, our very own GB News presenter, Nigel Farage, was among thousands of people joining Boxing Day hunts today in a continuation of an age-old tradition. More than 100 meets took place across the UK despite opposition from anti-hunting activists. With traditional fox hunting banned, enthusiasts now take part in trail hunts, where packs of hounds follow an artificial scent But animal rights campaigners claim this serves as a cover for killing foxes. Whilst Nigel was out earlier on Today, he got his thoughts from some of the public. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, I see you here every year.
Yes.
Why does this matter to you?
Because it's an English tradition and we should be proud of it.
They're not doing anything. We do it because it's a sport. It's a countryside sport, and this is what we do in the countryside.
It's everything, isn't it? It's not just the horses, it's the people, it's the hunt staff, the kennels.
Because, well, we want to come see you, Nigel, and to support the hunt as well. So.
Yeah. And what makes you feel the hunt matters?
It's English, natural, and down to earth, I suppose, is the reams of it.
Yeah. We've got some younger people here.
Yeah.
What's brought you along today?
To see you and to see the hunt. It's a nice British occasion. Come out, some mulled wine and some tea.
You see, it's really a social event. This is country people getting together, having a great day out.
OK, but bar the Boxing Day hunts, are they out of age? Are they a touch? Are they an age-old tradition? Should they still be celebrated? Let's get my thoughts on from my panel. We have journalist and broadcaster Linda Duberly, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and journalist and agony aunt Hilary Freeman. Well, that was interesting seeing people coming out. I really thought the whole hunt issue was over a long time
So did
ago.
I. I mean, if you look at the polling, 79% of people support keeping the ban that's in place at the moment, which is much higher than when the law was passed. And you know, we mentioned earlier I'm 30. It was one of my first political memories is the furious row over fox hunting. And on the one hand, I have sympathy with them because it is clearly a cultural tradition. It has a lot of resonance that, you know, generations of families have done this. It means a lot in these rural villages. It's a way to get together, and lots of the people that do that aren't as posh as you imagine from some of the scenes that you see on television. But I have to say, I do agree with the animal rights campaigners. There's clearly suggestions, evidence over the years, that these trail scents end up involving real foxes, that it's a disguise. And I think if that's the case, the law needs to be toughened up.
Yeah, I think that what happens, they actually use fox urine, don't they, to build the trail. So it's
who doesn't use fox urine?
So it's understandable that occasionally it's not a cover, but it's understandable that sometimes they will end up tracking a real fox. I can see how that happens. At the end of the day, it occurred to me today, it's a kind of storm in a stirrup cup, isn't it, really? Say you get 2 foxes, say you kill even 6 foxes, there's 21,000 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip, and we are worrying this.
I mean, come around where I live, the foxes had killed the humans the other way round.
Oh, yeah,
Central London foxes
they're very bold.
Else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think they hunt us.
What about Hilary, do you think that this has sort of been stirred up into just another front on the culture wars? Do you think it matters?
I think we've got so few kind of English cultural traditions left that people just cling on to this one, I think. And quite frankly, I'm sure there must be something better. I mean, you know, I know maypole dancing or something that doesn't involve cruelty and killing animals.
But this doesn't really involve cruelty and killing animals now.
It's supposedly.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, I'm a real urban girl. I feel ill if I go outside of Watford. You know, I'm probably not the person to comment on this tradition, but I don't understand it. I don't relate to it. I don't know why people want to do it. And you know, I think it's something that's best left in the past.
Yeah, do you think, Benjamin, they're saying that Labour... There's not even I haven't seen anything out there that Labour is trying to change them.
I mean, I think they have said that they would like to toughen up the rules because there are suggestions that there are some abuses, you know, that the trail hunts themselves, as you described, you know, they can quite clearly end up in foxes being killed. Look, you know, I know that the headline that's been on GB News all day is that campaigners are calling on Labour to stop their attack on fox hunters.
But has there been an
attack?
I haven't
heard anything.
What attack?
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
Well, you know what? Those pro-fox hunting campaigners who would gladly have the foxes killed, you know, legally, the reality is that the public is not on their side. The overwhelming majority of British people want the fox hunting ban to remain. They don't identify this as a great English tradition. You know, I grew up in the Cheshire countryside, and I don't remember ever seeing fox hunting. So clearly, it's not in all parts of the countryside by any means.
I live in the countryside. I haven't seen any hunts gathering on Boxing Day.
I know, but then it's strange because you see that footage there, and the people that Nigel was talking to They didn't look like they were going to be partaking in the hunt.
No, that's really... I found that slightly strange, actually.
It seems like they were there to meet him, and he's there to talk about the fox hunts.
He's a reality star now, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very... And the young man, I don't think the young man had probably even been alive when Fox...
Yeah, I'm not... You know, if they want to do... I think they're called drag hunts, aren't they? If they want to do these hunts where they lay this force trail, that's absolutely fine by me. I don't care. I mean, I actually care about, you know, what are we going to discuss towards the forthcoming election? What are we going to talk about when it comes to the economy, to the cost of living, to immigration, to housing for my kids, all those things? I don't care about a bunch of posh people in their pink riding jackets chasing a trail of urine across the countryside.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
The only thing I'd say, and I think some of these people would be screaming at the telly, is that I think it is a bit of a misconception that they are all posh. Clearly, there is a great tradition of it among, you know, countryside aristocrats, but a lot of people who live in rural parts of this country are actually quite poor. You know, a lot of people who are farmers might be land wealthy, but the amount of money coming in is a real struggle. And it's, you know, it's interesting that they attack the Labour Party, because I know, as someone who's been involved in the Labour Party for a long time, it's often a discussion about why more people in rural areas don't vote Labour, because a great many of them actually have very little financial, you know, have very little wealth.
He's not going to come out and campaign about this, is he? But really,
he's not, and neither do I think he should. But I do think that, you know, they feel underrepresented when urban areas, you have so many people living in big cities these days.
True.
That these kind of issues, whether it's not necessarily fox hunting, but the poverty that is very real in rural England, is heavily overlooked, because we think it's just, you know, high-flying lawyers in London that bought a second home in the countryside, when actually a lot of these people
I can
have a really hard deal.
But this isn't about poverty, is it?
No.
It's not.
So, Hillary, do you think this is
symbolism?
Is this a distraction?
That's right.
Is this another fake front in this cultural war, maybe put forward by Tories to distract the rural poor,
I think,
from voting Labour?
Quite possibly, yes.
But has it been put forward by Tories?
As you say, I've not heard anything about this until today.
We're talking about who put this in the auto cue for us to talk about this?
I think it is interesting to discuss, because I think it's emblematic of a certain kind of outlook, and I think it is worth talking about to a point. But I'm simply saying there are other things which are really going to take our time and our mental effort to discuss and distill.
I 100% agree
going
with
forward.
you. Benjamin, I mean, it's interesting because of what you were saying about how, your first memory of this, but it feels very dated. I mean, it feels like there's been so many more issues that are worthy of our attention. This seems somewhat ridiculous now.
To be honest, I think one of the reasons it was probably quite clever politics by Tony Blair at the time was because I think it already felt dated to a lot of people back then. The idea that this was a contemporary question seemed preposterous. So it was quite a good wedge issue, a dividing line. But it has lingered a bit like Brexit in Tory politics. You know, I forget whether it's Theresa May or Boris Johnson, but I think it might have been Boris Johnson, intended to have a free vote on fox hunting having the ban removed. It remains a big issue among Tory MPs, and I think the Tory party is going to go to the right with their next leader. And I would not be surprised if it's Tory policy to bring back fox hunting.
Get fox hunting done properly, Brexit done properly. All right, very shortly, I'm going to be sharing with you my Boxing Day thoughts on Stephen Fry's alternative Christmas message that was aired on Channel 4. And we have more interviews. We've got more of the panellists. I'm hoping that we're going to get some shouting at some point, just for old time's sake.
I'll storm off.
Good, excellent. Thank you,
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've got Storm Garrett on the way. After what has been a fairly calm Boxing Day, it does turn very unsettled. We're expecting some travel disruption over the next 24 hours. Storm Garrett is going to move in. Tai Sabah's indicating very strong winds across the country, some heavy rain and blizzards across Scotland as well. This evening time, dry across the northeast of the UK, but further south and west, rain quickly piling in, turning heavy as we move into the early hours. The wind's picking up too, with gales around the coast. It's generally mild tonight as the Temperatures rise and the cloud and the rain moves in, some icy stretches across northern Scotland. As the rain bumps into the colder air across the higher ground of Scotland, we will see this turn to snow, and with strengthening winds we could see some blizzards developing. 60-70 mile an hour gusts are possible, and the rain heavy across much of the UK, leading to spray on the roads and some local flooding. Very mild, temperatures 12-13 Celsius, but wind gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour, 60 to 70 around the coast. It will feel cooler than this. Thursday remains unsettled, further blustery showers across the UK, some of these heavy at times, gusty winds for all, some brighter spells at times in between those showers moving through, and temperatures generally around, if not a little above average for the time of year, and it stays unsettled right through into the weekend.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Country Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
It's 10 p.m, it's Boxing Day. Coming up tonight on the show with me, Josh Howe. Very shortly, I'll be sharing with you my Boxing Day thoughts on Stephen Fry's alternative Christmas message that was aired on Channel 4. We'll be looking at Boxing Day sales. It seems they've been under attack as groups of demonstrators appeared to target stores including Zara and H&M at East London Shopping Centre. And we'll have the papers straight hot off the press at 10:30 p.m. And my wonderful Boxing Day panel are with me in the studio. We have Linda Duberly, Benjamin Butterworth and Hilary Freeman. There we are, zooming in on them there. And later on, they'll be nominating their greatest Britons and union jackasses. Lots to come in the next hour. Have you been splashing the cash on the Boxing Day sales? Email me now or gbviews@gbnews.com. See you after the headlines.
Good evening, this is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The UK is bracing itself for Storm Garrett, which is set to batter much of the country, with drivers now being warned of potentially hazardous conditions on their way home from the Christmas holidays. The Met Office has issued several yellow weather warnings from midnight into the early hours on Thursday, with alerts for strong wind, rain and snow. Gusts between 50 to 70 miles per hour will sweep across the country, with high ground and exposed coast being hit the hardest.
Most of England and Wales will see torrential rain, whereas the peaks of Scotland and the Northern Isles are likely to see some of that snow. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following a fatal stabbing in Croydon. 27-year-old Michael Patrick Afonso Peixoto died after being attacked by a group of men in Thornton Heath on the 19th of December. A 22-year-old remains in custody and an investigation is ongoing. The Met Police are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. 4 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a man was stabbed in East London today. The Met Police say officers were called to reports of a stabbing in Hackney early this morning. A 49-year-old man was found with stab wounds and later died from his injuries. 2 men aged 49 and 42 and 2 women aged 35 and 44 have all been arrested and remain in police custody. Labour has been warned to stay away from traditional Boxing Day fox hunt parades ahead of the next general election. Countryside campaigners have told the party to end what they call its running attack on rural communities. They say Sir Keir Starmer risks igniting a toxic culture war if his party repeats past attacks on rural life. Fox hunting was banned in England and Wales in 2004. However, Labour has vowed to crack down on all hunts. A major study suggests vitamin D deficiency, depression and diabetes are among a number of health issues that can increase the risk of young-onset dementia. The findings suggest targeting health and lifestyle factors could reduce the risk of the condition. Researchers have identified a number of risk factors for that condition, which is characterised by dementia symptoms before the age of 65. They say the findings challenge the idea that genetics are the sole cause. And Queen Camilla hosted afternoon tea at Windsor Castle today for a girl with a brain tumour. The little girl, who spent most of her life on chemotherapy, sang a Christmas song and gave the Queen a handmade ring. Olivia Taylor has a brain tumour which has left her blind, but she leapt up to say, "Hello, Your Majesty," as she met Queen Camilla. The 7-year-old also tried her very first cup of tea, which was poured by the Queen. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Josh.
Yesterday, in Channel 4's alternative Christmas message, national treasure Stephen Fry outed himself as a Jew. And worse than that, he dared call out the dramatic increase these last few months in anti-Semitism, which has sent the far left into a meltdown. He was still trending earlier on today on X, and here's just a sample from my scrolling. It's propaganda. He's in hock to the Israel lobby. It's a red flag. He's torched his reputation. He's selfish to his bones. He's chasing a knighthood. I'll never watch him again. He's a Zionist. Like Zionism's a dirty word, as opposed to just thinking that the state of Israel has the right to exist. There are also conspiracies about, is Stephen Fry being financed by somebody? Who's he in the pocket of? And there are many, many far-left people who just suddenly, for some mysterious reason, simply thought that even though they liked him before, Stephen Fry was now a C-word. A C-word merely for pointing out that since October 7th, there have been 50 separate anti-Semitic incidents a day here in my hometown of London, an increase of 1,350%, which includes vandalism and assaults and even Jewish schools being closed. The most recent and saddest incident I saw was this graffiti on Christmas Eve, and it says, "They're evil, Jew ban Jew." Now, that is Notting Hill. That's it's Meanwhile Gardens skate park. I grew up just around the corner. I even skated there a few times when I was a teenager, and I was very, very bad. But I have fond memories, apart from a sore coccyx, of being encouraged and made to feel welcome. It was an inclusive place where the only factor that really mattered was meritocracy. I guess not anymore. But wait, what about the far right? Stephen's attackers cry. Even though he specifically calls them out in his message, I too have had far right anti-Semites attack me. It wasn't pleasant, and I'm not naive to their hatred. But what about Gaza? They cry, even though Fry specifically mentions the war, even though he's long been an outspoken critic of Israel, sometimes justifiably, although in this instance, to my mind, he partly calls out Israel for the tragic loss of Gazan civilian life, when instead I'd put all the blame firmly on Hamas's shoulders. But what about Islamophobia? Even though, well, anyway, you get the point. For the far left, if bigotry, hypocrisy or just outright stupidity doesn't work, then whataboutery is their favourite weapon. And if that doesn't work, if their arguments fail because of their incoherence and inconsistencies, then of course they resorted to trying to smear him, just as they did when Rachel Riley spoke out, or Tracy Ann Oberman spoke out, or David Baddiel spoke out. But maybe this time it's different. Maybe Stephen Fry is just too much part of our cultural fabric for people to not see how mental and racist the response from the far left has been. I'm sure Fry knew what he was doing, that the far left would let the veil drop, that their mask would finally, fully come off if he dared turn himself into their target. Well, he dared. And by doing so, they so eloquently have proved his point. What a C word. But to respond now, I'm joined again by journalist and broadcaster Linda Duberly, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and journalist and agony aunt Hilary Freeman. So have you guys seen the stuff today? Hilary, have you seen the stuff on Twitter that has just gone mental, or X now?
Yeah, I mean, it just proves the point, doesn't it? I mean, it is not about Israel. It is about anti-Semitism. People are anti-Semitic, and, you know, when somebody like Stephen Fry, who is, you know, we want to call him a national treasure, comes out and says he's Jewish, people go crazy. And what's that about?
Well, but when you say people go crazy, it's not people. I think most people don't care or they're interested. It's for me, the whole point is the far left.
Generally, it's the far left, yes. I mean, you can't always tell on Twitter. You can't always tell anymore, quite frankly, because the far left and the far right on this issue are pretty much morphed together. I think the only difference with Stephen Fry is that probably the far right didn't like him before because he's gay, whereas now the far left have got a reason to not like him. You know, I think that's really the only difference. And you know, people have, you know, he has, as you said, called out Israel in the past, and yet now he's come out and said, I'm Jewish, and suddenly he's a terrible person. So what is this about? And it's clear that, you know, what is going on in this country has got nothing to do with, you know, people saying, oh, we're not allowed to criticise the Israeli government. Well, yes, you are.
Of course you are.
But why does that mean anti-Semitism has gone up? You know, it's
and also, like that, it doesn't mean that you can't then call it anti-Semitism and go, wait a minute, that's a bad thing.
That is a staggering figure, 1,350%. That's a staggering figure. But where does that figure come from?
It comes from the Met.
Right, so actually, probably fairly accurate. Actually, they're quite good at their data collection. So
and probably on the low side, because I've experienced a few things I haven't reported. So if there are other people who haven't reported things because they think, well, it's not that serious.
Yeah. I mean, this is like you know, vandalism, people being attacked verbally in the street, but also physically as well.
Yeah. I think it's not just about anti-Semitism as well. I think it's about this general. I mean, we started with this subject, actually, at the beginning of this programme, but it's about this general polarisation and anger that keeps coming out. It seems as though people want to get angry. They want a subject and they want to be angry about it, one way or the other.
And it's also about the lack of understanding, because most of the people who are criticising do not know anything about the history of Israel. They don't know anything about Zionism, and they think that because they have this idea of themselves as virtuous people, and they can see people dying, therefore Zionism must be terrible, Israel shouldn't exist, and Jews are bad people.
Do you think, Benjamin, that they've exposed themselves?
I mean, look, the reason I oppose Stephen Fry is that jumper.
Oh, yes, I see what you mean.
And his sexuality, of course.
Of course, I can't stand gay people. Look, the reason people oppose Stephen Fry's Christmas message is exactly why he needs to do a Christmas message talking about anti-Semitism. You know, the fact that people who have beloved Stephen Fry for decades, as millions of Britons have, and around the world, and then he suddenly gets all this abuse because he comes out to acknowledge that he is Jewish, really tells you the story. And the fact is that I think there's been a mainstreaming of anti-Semitism in recent years. You know, it's the oldest racism, and to any rational person, it's so hard to comprehend. You know, like any racism is. but it's managed to creep its way in as an acceptable form of racism. It's able to dress itself up as being against the rich and powerful, which, of course, is an anti-Semitic trope.
Yes.
But then it becomes into the language that left-wing people usually use. And, of course, it's worth noting Stephen Fry is a lifelong Labour voter. He's done Labour Party political broadcasts in the past. This is not a man who's right-wing. This is not a man who is ever going to endorse Netanyahu's approach to governing. And yet you have people associate supporting the Israeli government somehow with your average Jewish person. When you have attacks like 7/7 and Muslims face racism on the streets of London, we can all see that that's completely unacceptable because your regular, Muslim woman going about her life isn't responsible for what Al-Qaeda or ISIS does. And yet we are seeing the equivalent happen to Jewish people on the streets of Britain, and somehow the outrage isn't matched to that which other groups get.
If I could just point out, I totally agree with what you're saying, but the difference is this hatred is coming from anti-racists.
Yes.
Or self-proclaimed anti-racists.
Alleged.
Yeah, well, that's it, of course, that they see themselves as that way, and they're able to do that kind of mental gymnastics. That's the crazy thing. You look at these people's profiles, and they're virtuous and they're good and they're racist and the worst thing ever, yet the stuff that they've been coming out with in the last 24 hours is insane.
And yet if you talk
because they believe all the tropes, all the anti-Semitic
tropes. But
tropes.
also, if you said to any of them, do you think you could talk to me a little bit about what went on between the Arabs and the Israelis in the 1920s and the Balfour Agreement and where the lines were and what the views were and how history came to pass and what went on in the Yom Kippur War and what do you think of international settlers in the West Bank? Do you think many of them would be able to answer accurately?
Not only could they not answer, though, but if you tell them the truth, if you give them the facts, they tell you that you're lying because Jews lie and Jews have always played the victim and every trope comes out.
You talk about the anti-racism issue. They talk as though all these Jewish people, all these people, rather, in Israel are white, when, of course, most people in Israel are not white.
Yeah, people of colour.
And yet, the kind of binaries that are talked about are completely ignored when it comes to Israelis and to Jewish people. Yes. But also, when they talk about, rightly, they raise some of the things that are happening in the war that are, not appropriate, that are not helping Israel's cause. And yet, you never hear these people talk about the same actions in Syria or in Yemen.
Well, Turkey, Turkey yesterday, you had bombing the Kurdish hospital, Royal Crescent Hospital.
Yeah.
That hasn't been covered anywhere. And certainly none of those people have posted about it.
But going back to Stephen Fry, I think one of the things that shocked people that they thought, well, he is our national treasure. He's so English, and I think that's part of it. He's so English. He's one of us. But actually, he's Jewish. So he's other, and we're shocked that he's Jewish because we thought he was one of us. And I
wonder if that is part of it, because it feels to me like these attacks coming from the far left, they don't particularly embrace their Englishness. If that makes sense.
No, but I think maybe they do on some level. I think maybe they do. That's what I'm saying. I don't think the far left and the far right are very different, really, in that respect. And I think the other thing this has all shown is that people do not understand what Judaism is about, what Jews are.
No, definitely.
I mean, a lot of the criticisms I've seen have said, but he's an atheist. How can he be Jewish? And it's like Judaism is not just a religion.
Yeah, Judaism is sort of on top of the ethnicity.
Yes.
I mean, I remember when, after October 7th, I interviewed you for the newspaper I write for, and you told me about how your kids weren't wearing their blazers because it would indicate their Jewishness. How has that changed in the past 2 months?
They're still not wearing their blazers. Yeah, they don't wear their blazers, or they wear outside jackets now because it's winter, and I make sure that they zip them up. And that is the official advice from the school that they go to hide the badge, which has a bit of Hebrew writing on it.
And how long do we think this is going to continue for? I mean, this war is not going to be over anytime soon. Your children could be facing this sort of situation for months and months and months.
The genie is out of the bottle. It's not going to go back in.
It won't.
But, of course, your kids are innocent in this, whether in Israel, Gaza, or whether they're Brits facing anti-Semitism. How do you explain this to young children? I
think that's the hardest thing. I mean, the smaller ones who are sort of 6, 7, they haven't needed to be exposed to, but the teenagers who are out in the world, I have to warn them to be very conscious of who they're around, if they're speaking, who they're speaking to, if people can identify them. Interesting, my eldest wanted me to buy him for Hanukkah a Star of David, because it had that sort of the opposite effect of making him defiant. But the question
that's what
I'd have to ask is...
I've started wearing one for
Well,
the
I do.
first
I
time.
wear out and about on the tube. But then I had a man, actually was with his family, sort of shout at me, Free Palestine, in quite an intimidating way. I mean, look, it's not the end of the world, but the point is, you're just like, wait, I'm just sitting here with my Star of David.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. But you have seen others being physically attacked. Visible Jews in the street in certain parts of London being attacked.
My daughter's 8, and she goes to school in East London, where she is one of only 5 non-Muslim kids in her class, and she's had to deal with stuff. And we had to talk to the school and the head teacher, and she's being they're protecting her because it hasn't got nasty, but there has been some nastiness with parents. So this has now become something she's had to learn to deal with.
Well, that's it. And do you think that... I'm going to push this a bit further, but the far left, to me, we have to address that there is some of this increase, unfortunately, has come from parts of the Muslim community. And I feel like the far left, frankly, are providing a shield for that kind of behaviour, whereas we can just... Why can't we just address this and be open? And that's how we can start to move forward and hopefully heal and fix things. If we can't actually call stuff out, that just puts it under the rug.
Yeah.
I mean, I as someone who's proudly on the centre-left, I would absolutely say that the left has a problem with ignoring the bigotry that comes from parts of the Muslim community. There are lots of things, lots of examples of prejudice, and it cuts different ways. And one of the reasons I'm on the centre-left is because as a gay person in a minority group, I care about prejudice and have been on the receiving end of it, for most of my conscious life. But there's a problem that the left has, which is that there is this blind spot to the fact that the Muslim community in this country, while being on the receiving end of all sorts of prejudice itself, has a problem with anti-Semitism that has been very clearly demonstrated about sections of the Muslim community, and it's also far more homophobic than the population at large. We've seen that with the gay teacher in Batley and Spen. We've seen that with several incidents of LGBT education in Birmingham, where they didn't just say, oh, we don't like it, which is fine, that's a democratic society, you can say that as a parent. They didn't say that. They pull their kids out of school. They have aggressive protests. They have the teachers sacked. We've seen so many examples of this, and I think the left has a problem, and Labour MPs have a problem that they ignore it. A Labour MP told me recently that he thinks some of his colleagues think they're the member for the mosque, is the phrase he used, because they are so intimidated by the community groups, the Muslim community groups.
And what's behind that? What's behind that?
Well, I think the sheer number of them means that they can exert a power. There's about 30 seats in this country where...
It's about votes.
Exactly, where they're definitive in who gets to be the Member of Parliament. And I think that's dangerous because they're entitled to express their opinion and organise. Jewish groups are often very organised as well. But you don't get a right to intimidate, and I think it's crossed a line.
Yeah, no, and arguably just before Christmas we saw a school closing 2 days early, and that was, I believe in the right to protest, but I also believe in the right to have an education, and that was wrong. But it feels like if our institutions, which a lot of them are, have a left-leaning bent, aren't willing to actually deal with some of this stuff, the issue's going to continue and possibly get worse, which would be obviously very sad. Anyway, up next, Boxing Day sales have been disrupted at the Westfield Shopping Centre. Oh, OK, we've got more of the same, basically. I'm going to be joined by Simon Darnshuk and Lindy Dubley to discuss this. Don't go anywhere.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. It seems that Boxing Day sales have been busy today. Pro-Palestinian protesters have disrupted Boxing Day sales at the Westfield shopping centre in Stratford, East London. The demonstrators appeared to be targeting stores including Zara, H&M and Starbucks. Footage showed crowds inside a branch of H&M, which was reportedly forced to shut. In footage circulating on social media, police and security guards can be seen guarding the entrance of the H&M store. Well, it's more. We had this Christmas Eve. It's continued now. Welcome back, Simon. Thank you so much for rejoining us. By the way, I just want to say I got this suit today at Zara.
At Zara?
At Zara. I went there to show my... That's how petty I am. It's like, I was like, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to buy something from Zara.
You know, I think the fact of the matter is, though, that we've got to accept that we live in a world where there are pockets of extreme violence which are tragic and miserable, but they are alongside other parts of the world which are, you know, running in a fairly smooth fashion. And we've got to get used to the fact that these things exist and we have to try our hardest to find solutions, but that doesn't involve going straight out onto the streets with your banners and standing outside shop fronts.
I completely agree with you, Linda. You know, it's terrible what's going on in the Middle East, but it shouldn't result in ordinary British people being able to go about their daily business. And I think these protesters, because of the failure from the police to take action against Just Stop Oil and others, I think protesters like these have learned from Just Stop Oil that they can get away with it. And I think the Met Police just need to be tougher and stronger on this.
Well, I mean, I wonder if, to be honest, it was Just Stop Oil who learned from the protesters. We saw the cinemas that were closed down. And all we saw the teacher, obviously, and death threats, and nothing really happened. We saw the Quran that was dropped and the police kind of appeasing that kind of behaviour. And, of course, the silly thing about this is that Zara, in particular, has got nothing to do with what's going on in Gaza. It was an advertising campaign that was thought of, conceived, shot months before October 7th.
I mean, there was a slight indication that they'd put some kind of plastic wrapping, plastic bags around dummies in the window, which was a kind of trendy style.
But that was tying into their advertising.
That was tied into the campaign. That was more recent,
Yeah.
and there was a suggestion it was quite triggering about body bags and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, you can't replicate in a micro way the kind of huge conflict we see in the Middle East onto the streets of London. That's what people find unacceptable. I mean, look at these pictures now. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's intimidation.
We just don't want to see it here. We work hard, in the main, really hard to build a decent, law-abiding country where people do have the opportunity to go out and experience a peaceful Christmas. But what we're seeing here is a kind of replication of the conflict we need to solve. We need to solve the conflict, not rebuild it in a microwave.
Well, there you go. I mean, in terms of solving the conflict, this is not going to do anything.
It won't make any difference at all.
It won't make any difference. So the only thing it's going to do is to intimidate shoppers out on Boxing Day, which, as you say, it's British tradition. We're out there, we're spending our hard-earned money.
But if you were Jewish and you were in Westfield Shopping Centre, you would be really scared. I mean, it's not acceptable. It will have been easier to police in Westfield because it will be private property. And so what I understand is that the security guards, with the assistance of the police, were able to move them out of the shopping centre. It'd be much harder when it occurred on Oxford Street. But the Met Police put out a statement saying there'd hardly been any disturbance.
It was incredible, wasn't it? I mean, the gaslighting from the Met through all of these protests.
The Met have been a real failure on this, and I'm disappointed that the Mayor, in fact, who has the Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, hasn't been more critical. Because he has responsibility for the Met Police. He should be coming out and saying, I want them to police these protests in a stronger fashion. He should be much clearer on that.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with really, really well-organised, well-policed, well-monitored protests. I've got 3 children, 30, 26 and 23, and they all campaign on different issues. From the environment to gay rights, lots and lots of things. So I'm not against well-planned protests. But
I've been to many protests.
These are spontaneous.
But this is unacceptable.
Yeah, they're spontaneous, I suspect, and they haven't got permission to be able to protest. So why don't arrests get made and show the other protesters that they have a potential for being arrested if they protest in this way?
I worked for, after the fall of Kabul, I worked for 2 years for Afghan evacuees. People who were evacuated off the tarmac at Kabul. I took 2 years out from journalism to do that. And I know what you have to go to organise a protest in central London. And you have to give 20, 30 days' notice in order to have the protest. So these spontaneous eruptions.
Well, of course, and of these hundreds of thousands of people that we've seen on the London protest, I wonder how many of them would rock up to these Afghan protests.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the thing, is that, again, hypocrisy. The streets are empty with the Syrian civilians being murdered, hundreds of thousands of them, but then suddenly everybody appears. The final question I just want to ask is, do you think, just like with Just Stop Oil and those kind of protests, that this might actually end up backfiring and hurting their cause even? Because I think families out today who, even, you know, everybody has concern and doesn't want Gazan civilian deaths.
No, I don't think it will have the same effect that the Just Stop Oil protest did. I mean, that was wholly unacceptable on the motorways and people were massively inconvenienced. I think this is irritating. I find it really frustrating that this kind of thing goes on, but actually it passes. Just Stop Oil was a different thing.
I think it is different. I've been shopping with my wife on Oxford Street today.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I have
How's
to say...
your wallet?
Yeah, exactly. So I have to say that if they'd been there, I mean, it was manic, you know, you could hardly move. But people wouldn't have been too amused if such a protest had reared its head again.
Yeah. I mean, Just Stop Oil did backfire on them. It did backfire on them because their biggest backer pulled out because he didn't think that those protests were getting all the way to home base, and he's now thinking of funding something in a different way. So there was a big impact that took place almost, well, not immediately, but it became apparent that they weren't going to get their funding. This is slightly different, I think. It just won't work.
Well, it won't work, but unfortunately it seems like it's still going to continue for the foreseeable future anyway. Thank you very much, Simon, for sticking around, and to Linda. Coming up is my paper review, where we dig deep and we do a dive in tomorrow's front pages. We're going to be right back in a second.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Let's bring you tomorrow's news tonight in the second most entertaining paper review show on telly. The very first front pages have just been delivered for my press pack. Right, time to take a look at the very first look at tomorrow's newspapers, front pages. And we have Sunak plots election trap for Starmer on spending. Then that's the I. We have the Express, end scandal of rip-off hospital parking charges. We were just getting all very, very angry about that. We have the Times with Tories to woo first-time buyers. And finally, the Daily Telegraph, number 10, plans to end IHT ahead of election. I thought it was HIT and I got a little bit scared there. OK, very good. So let's get back to journalists and broadcasters. We have Benjamin Butterworth, we have Linda, we have Hilary. Welcome back, guys. You know what? I want, because we immediately got so sort of passionate about it. Linda, you were just talking this thing about the Daily Express end scandal of rip-off hospital parking charges. Out of everything, this kind of this riles you up.
It's so inflammatory, and it's because throughout this year my mother has been very ill, and I've had to go to the hospital to try and visit her regularly. And the whole scenario is deplorable. I mean, the fact that people have to pay so much to visit their sick relatives, and it's not just the amount of money, it's the fact that all the charging machines are all different. They either require cash or they require you to download an app. I mean, I myself went for a scam at my nearby hospital in Amersham. I had to help 3 elderly people pay their parking charges because they didn't know how to operate the machine. It's
so
becoming
if I tell
ridiculous.
you I can't operate it, you'll pay for my car.
No, I won't pay, but I'll show you how to do it.
I mean, it says that they made 200 million.
It's ridiculous.
It's a lot of money. Yeah. I mean, where is that money going? Is it if it's going to subsidise
it?
Well,
no,
this
it
is
isn't.
It. You think it's going to external providers?
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, but I wonder if any is going to it, or if what they really can be done here. It's one of those things that's it's one of those extra kind of life taxes that's kind of creeped in.
I mean, if I remember rightly, because the newspaper I worked for did a lot on this during the pandemic, that they did manage to scrap it for a period. And it was very popular. It got lots of headlines. But the truth is that, you know, it raises, what, £200 million, according to the Daily Express. Presumably some of that is going to the hospitals. But it just feels in very poor taste.
That's right. It's insensitive.
At the most difficult times of their lives, for many of those people, are having this charge, one that will be as regular as you described, because, you know, when you get sick, you're probably visiting an awful lot. And then imagine the stress that adds when you might be going there to say goodbye to a loved one.
Yeah, because the point is, it's OK, maybe you're going there like I did recently for a bone scan, for example. That's a one-off. But the worst thing about these charges is they hit people when they're at their lowest. Because when your relative is very, very sick or dying, you have to be there every day. Now, if
you're dying.
Oh, yeah,
you know.
Exactly, and your relatives are faced with £8 a day, right? That's £30 a week. That's £120 a month. They are sick for a couple of months. People can't afford that when there's a cost of living crisis. It is a national disgrace.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, look, let's look at the eye. Sunak plots election trap for Starmer on spending. So I think the idea is that they're going to sort of announce 3 years of their budget. I mean, is there any trap that's actually going to work at this point?
No.
Let's move on. Moving on now.
But, you know, they're desperate. We've seen that in so many different ways. So Labour and Keir Starmer and the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, are trying to follow a similar playbook to what Blair and Brown did before the 97 election, and basically say, you can trust us with your money, with public money, you can trust us with the economy, because we're basically going to follow the same frugal attitude that the incumbent Tories have. That's the strategy. It's worked before. The polling would suggest it's working now. So, according to the front page of The Eye, Rishi Sunak is therefore going to try and lay out 3 years of spending, try and look more generous, try and indicate places where he can spend money. You saw it already with High Speed 2 being scrapped, and then giving all of these places where he'll spend the money, some of which were already built and spent, so it's misleading. And I think they're trying to make Labour look like the ungenerous ones, the ones that don't have ambition.
But don't you think that just looks, to the average person, completely disingenuous?
Of course it does. It's too little, too late. It's like if they were planning all these things, why have they waited 12 years to do them?
Yeah, we just wanted to get to the right moment. Yeah, we were teasing you, and finally they're going to actually deliver.
I think it's not only that they will try and lay out these plans so they can say, you know, X place, you'll get a new hospital. They did that one last time. They haven't come to fruition. You know, you'll get an upgraded school. Those kind of things that they might be able to point to with these 3-year spending plans. But I would also wonder, as a cynic, as any journalist should be, whether it would actually be a bit of a trap to try and get Labour to say, oh, OK, well, we'll spend a bit more. And then they can go, aha, you can't trust Labour. You're still going to be the big spenders.
You're not going to get that free broadband. Or whatever.
Oh, exactly. That was one of Jeremy Corbyn's policies, wasn't it? But in the past few days, clearly tax and spend is going to be at the heart of this election, because Labour has said it will borrow £28 billion for green energy investment. However, you've had several stories in the past week of them saying, actually, we don't want to do that because we're too worried that makes the word borrowing and Labour in the same sentence too much, that brings back bad memories. So, you know, I think Labour is actually going to be really quite fiscally conservative because it's so nervous.
Well, certainly leading up to the election and what they're going to say, but also tying yourself, I mean, Linda, to these kind of promises. I mean, you know, the Tories can really say whatever they want at this point.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter, does it? They can say what they want. Words are cheap.
And I think, do you think the voters now know that?
Oh, I think most people have worked it out. Yeah, absolutely. People, never mind journalists, are now cynical.
Yeah.
They're very, very cynical about politicians, for sure.
We'll see if Labour falls for this trap. Daily Telegraph has something similar. Number 10 plans to end IHT ahead of election. What are they doing there? This is a spring giveaway.
Means inheritance tax.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a menopause thing.
Well, the Telegraph doesn't like.
You thought it was HRT.
That's it.
But the Telegraph doesn't like to say inheritance tax. It's like,
yeah. I must say, it's a funny.
It's quite a long headline.
It's a funny thing. Well, I know it would be a long headline, but it's a funny thing to put in a headline. I used to write headlines for Daily Mail when I did a brief spell of subbing, and that just. You're right. When you first look at it, you think HRT, HIT. IHT. It's just a silly thing to put in a headline.
Yeah.
But the story, the subject of inheritance tax, that's important.
It's a big story, yes, and it's important to a lot of voters.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Is this? Do you think that this is indication of an early vote?
I don't know. I mean, I think the Conservative Party will.
Cling in.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think?
What, you think they'll abolish inheritance tax?
I think they would like to.
I think they'd like to, but... You know, I think if Liz Truss had stayed as Prime Minister, you probably would have seen something this radical, which some people would cheer. I wouldn't be one of them. The suggestion here that, again, makes me cynical. They say that in 3 months they're looking to announce that they'll abolish inheritance tax. Well, we've been seeing
We could be close to the election by then.
Exactly, yeah, spring election, that would be convenient. We've been seeing these stories in the papers for much of this year.
Yeah.
The government has a problem that we have the highest tax burden that anybody of working age has ever seen.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, you know, they keep saying, oh, we're going to reduce the taxes. And you think, oh, God, and wait until Rishi Sunak finds out who the bloke that did that was. Well, obviously, it was him as Chancellor. And so the implication, the statement in this Daily Telegraph article is that they need something that captures the public imagination, that actually looks like a gear change. And inheritance tax only raises £7 billion a year, which, relative to a lot of taxes,
I
is
agree
not
with
that
that
much money. So maybe this
But
is
it does capture the public imagination.
Exactly. So maybe this is a cut that they can afford. The other problem is that Jeremy Hunt doesn't want tax cuts, really, because they can cause inflation to go up, which is a much bigger problem. Inheritance tax doesn't affect inflation on other things.
Well, it's a balancing act. The Times, talking about trying to woo the voters and talking also about endless stories and endless promises, have Tories to woo these first-time buyers. Now, this is, again, an issue that has been raised for more than a decade now, and it really comes down to not building enough houses.
It comes down to several things. Well, I think this is a very important story, and I think that the Conservative Party should have approached this, tried to tackle it a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Because this is the issue that troubles, for example, my children, probably your age group as well. Yeah. I mean, I've got, as I said earlier, 30-year-old son, 26-year-old son, 23-year-old daughter. The 26-year-old and 23-year-old simply do not conceive that they will own their property for many, many years. Yeah. And because they live in London, they are going to have to spend a huge proportion of their income on rent. And we're talking about, my daughter's an architect, my son works in theatre, that's not particularly well paid, but at least decent career. You know, it's very, very difficult. The Tories should have tackled this if they want to hold on to younger viewers.
Which maybe
younger voters.
Have they just given... Is it too little, too late?
Again, it's too little, too late.
Yeah.
I don't think this is going to make young people vote Tory. And, you know, maybe they should, you know, tackle rents as well, you know, make rents cheaper so that people can save to buy a house. It's not just about, you know, being able to buy a house. You need to have the money to do it, and you can't do that while you're paying rent.
You can't get younger voters if you don't do something to accommodate them.
Yeah, I mean, the forecast is that in the next year, house prices will fall, but rents will continue to rise. So, you know, the practicality of those people trying to get on the housing ladder, the slight fall in house prices will mean nothing when more money is going into rent, so you can't save up.
Yeah.
And this year,
exactly.
you know, rent rise inflation has been at about 16%. You know, and I think a lot of the figures that we use to describe the effect of the economy on people's lives completely miss that kind of reality for a lot of people.
So the house prices have fallen by 20%. I'm told by the leading sort of marketer for one of the big estate agencies. They may drop further. But that doesn't help when you've got to come up with a socking great deposit, does it?
And you've got also rising costs in all these other areas. My eldest is 14. And to be honest, I don't see this problem getting sorted out by then.
Well,
anyway,
they promised to get rid of the leasehold laws, didn't they? They still haven't done that.
Anyway.
Why not?
Coming up, we're going to have more from our paper review, and I'm going to name my Greatest Britain and Union jackasses. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, and it's time to return to the second liveliest paper review show on telly, and more front pages have been delivered hot off the press. We have The Guardian. Ex-GCHQ chief warns ministers over government by WhatsApp. The Mirror, NHS parking scandal gets worse. Dozens of under-5s in the mail here referred to NHS gender service. Finally, The Sun, cashback with a bang. Well, returning to my panellists, let's go straight away. Linda, you mentioned this here, the WhatsApp. You provide training to government ministers?
Not to government ministers, it's actually our emergency services. And what I try and do sometimes is a look at the media landscape, and I look at the hierarchy of social media platforms. But I always talk about WhatsApp because so many people use it, and they all regard it as completely secure because it's end-to-end encrypted. But it's nowhere near as secure as you think it is. I mean, look at how embarrassing the WhatsApp messages have been for Boris Johnson and for Matt Hancock. You look at some of the messages that Dominic Cummings was sending out over WhatsApp. They were really disgraceful.
So why are they not learning
because I think they live in an echo chamber and they just pay no attention.
I mean, I think, you know, WhatsApp is a relatively recent development, and I think there's a certain level of naivety at first. You know, in most people in our work lives, we do a lot of it over text message and WhatsApp, and I think maybe there is a level of informality to government in recent years. But also, I think in a public interest way, it is unacceptable, because you've seen with both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, they've had thousands of messages they claim have disappeared, and so we can't trace the decision-making that
Sturgeon
ministers are making. Exactly.
Yes.
And also now, WhatsApp, you can set it to have... So
That's
that it
right,
disappears.
it deletes.
Yeah, you can.
Self-deletes.
Now, that is unprecedented in terms of how government communications and policy is happening. Exactly. And we should have record of how decisions are made, both that can end up being publicly available if necessary, but also, you know, as a matter of legal responsibility
Is it not a
within
legal
government.
requirement that it's a matter of record?
Well, I think it is, but clearly there's been a setup that's allowed to avoid that.
Didn't he?
Yeah, all you do is say you lost it.
So you lost it.
When you get a new phone. Now, anyone watching this that's got a new phone will know that their WhatsApps are still there.
We have something called a cloud. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we've moved on since the sort of Nixon tapes. Daily Mail, dozens of under-5s referred to NHS gender service. We've only got a few minutes left in the show, but Benjamin and I...
Oh, that's on you.
Should we move on? Yeah, I mean, this is, more than 70 3- and 4-year-old children sent to the controversial clinic. Gosh, I mean, there's so much...
But I mean, look, there's only 70 people in the whole country, so I really don't think that's a particularly notable figure. I mean, you know what? You will meet trans people that will describe recognising that in themselves at a young age in a way that most gay people would, for example, before they could put a word on it. I think the problem that we have is that, I mean, you know, obviously it's very unusual for someone of that age to think along these lines. But I think we have a lack of resource for assessing whether a young person, someone under 18, is transgender or not, and that's caused a lot of problems. You know, a friend of mine did detransition, and what he describes is the fact that counselling was so inadequate to actually understand his issues and whether he was. Now, that both is a mistake that can see people go down the route that shouldn't, but it also can mean that people that really need the help aren't getting it, and I think sometimes that's forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, what do you guys think? Obviously, it's a never-ending toxic subject, Hillary, but...
I think a 3-year-old, I mean, though children of that age, I mean, you know, they believe that they are a dinosaur. You know, I honestly
They believe that I'm their dad.
Yeah.
There's no way of...
I mean, you know, a boy of 3 who wants to play with dolls, I think it'd be very easy for a parent to now think, well, maybe... He's actually
yeah.
girl.
Also,
you just wouldn't act on it.
And also, we have to ask about whether it's coming from the parents, but that's my personal opinion. Yeah. We are going to reveal today's greatest Britain and Union jackass. Jackass? I don't know. Here we go. Let's find out. So, Linda, who do you think is your...
So my hero is a young woman called Laura Macy, who has just donated her kidney to a complete stranger. A friend of mine and his twin brother did this about 7 or 8 years ago. They both gave a kidney to completely unknown people. Apparently, there are 83 people who did this year in the UK. And I can't think of anything more courageous or self-sacrificing than to give a vital organ away.
That is amazing.
To a complete stranger.
Not to diminish them, but I have to move on very quickly.
Sorry, am I talking too much?
My greatest Britain is Olivia Taylor, a 7-year-old girl with a brain tumour who had tea with...
We have seen
Oh, yes.
Well, there we are. We've seen footage of her today.
Yeah, you're right.
We've seen her in the headlines, and I thought that was a beautiful...
Lovely.
It's very lovely. Hillary...
Mine is Stephen Fry, for the reasons we discussed earlier.
You know what? I'm going to go with Linda, but I'm also going to go with all the people who've donated organs. I think that's an incredibly special thing to do.
Yeah.
Respect to them. I'm sorry that we can't talk about it a little bit further. Let's do our jackasses.
So definitely Thames Water Authority.
Oh,
I cannot
Don't even
imagine.
get me started.
Yeah, it's
We've only got a
difficult.
minute left.
If you've only got 60 seconds, but how people can annoy customers, shareholders alike in a perfect storm of incompetence is unbelievable.
Benjamin? My union jackass is the fox hunting campaigners threatening the Labour Party. Look, we've got much more important issues than your desire to rip a fox apart. I think they need to get a grip.
And Hillary, finally?
Mine is potentially blasphemous, but it's the Pope.
Oh!
Wow, OK.
Right, Sinead O'Connor.
I've got too much hair for that. Yeah. For calling the Israeli government terrorists. So calling for peace and then using inflammatory language like terrorists to describe a government and its army.
You know what?
Legitimately
I'm going to be a good Jew and go with the Pope on this one.
Well, I'm a Catholic, so I will be...
You're going to stay away that one. Anyway, thank you so much to my panellists. Thank you for joining us here. We have Patrick Christys. He's going to be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. But now it's going to be time for Headliners. Thank you guys for watching and have a great night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've got Storm Garrett on the way. After what has been a fairly calm Boxing Day, it does turn very unsettled. We're expecting some travel disruption over the next 24 hours. Storm Garrett is going to move in, tight isobars indicating very strong winds across the country, some heavy rain and blizzards across Scotland as well. This evening time, dry across the northeast of the UK, but further south and west, rain quickly piling in, turning heavy as we move into the early hours. The wind's picking up too, with gales around the coast. Generally mild tonight as the temperatures rise and the cloud and the rain moves in, some icy stretches across northern Scotland. As the rain bumps into the colder air across the higher ground of Scotland, we will see this turn to snow, and with strengthening winds we could see some blizzards developing. 60-70 mile-an-hour gusts are possible, and the rain heavy across much of the UK, leading to spray on the roads and some local flooding. Very mild, temperatures 12-13 Celsius, but wind gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour, 60 to 70 around the coast. It will feel cooler than this. Thursday it remains unsettled, further blustery showers across the UK, some of these heavy at times, gusty winds for all, some brighter spells at times in between those showers moving through, and temperatures generally around, if not a little above average for the time of year, and it stays unsettled right through into the weekend.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The UK is bracing itself for Storm Garrett, which is set to batter much of the country, with drivers now being warned of potentially hazardous conditions on their way home from the Christmas holidays. The Met Office has issued several yellow weather warnings from midnight into the early hours on Thursday, with alerts for strong wind, rain and snow. Gusts between 50 to 17 miles per hour will sweep across the country, with high ground and exposed coast being hit the hardest. Most of England and Wales will see torrential rain, whereas the peaks of Scotland and the Northern Isles are likely to see that snow. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following a fatal stabbing in Croydon. 27-year-old Michael Patrick Afonso Peixoto died after being attacked by a group of men in Thornton Heath on the 19th of December. A 22-year-old remains in custody and an investigation is ongoing. The Met Police are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. 4 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a man was stabbed in East London today. The Met Police say officers were called to reports of a stabbing in Hackney early this morning. A 49-year-old man was found with stab wounds and later died from his injuries. 2 men aged 49 and 42 and 2 women aged 35 and 44 have all been arrested and remain in police custody. Unsolved shoplifting cases across England and Wales have soared to a 5-year high. Over 200,000 cases went unsolved in the past year in what's being described by the Lib Dems as a growing crime epidemic. Home Office data shows that number of shoplifting cases were closed without a suspect being identified. An average of over 560 go unsolved every day. And finally, Queen Camilla hosted afternoon tea today at Windsor Castle for a girl with a brain tumour. The little girl, who spent most of her life on chemotherapy, sang a Christmas song and gave the Queen a handmade ring. Olivia Taylor has a brain tumour which has left her blind, but she leapt up to say hello, Your Majesty, as she met Queen Camilla. The 7-year-old also tried her very first cup of tea, which was poured by the Queen. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now time for headlines.
Hello and welcome to Headliners, your first look at the day after Boxing Day's newspapers. We review the news with 3 top comedians. I'm Stephen Allen. I'm here with 2 people who were available to work on Boxing Day. Josh Howe, and seeing as Lewis Schaefer's been now fired, we're joined by Nicholas DeSanto. Can you imagine the kind of person who's available to work on Boxing?
I've just been drinking at home. I got a call 2 minutes ago. And they sent me around the cab, and I just arrived here.
Your evil twin did the show earlier.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The difficulty with an evil twin, normally they're the one with a beard, but you got a beard.
Did they have hair?
No.
Okay, then they're not truly evil.
No, fair enough. But good Christmases so far?
Yeah.
I've been working every second.
I have 2 little kids and a mortgage, so it's good to be here.
Hey, there we go.
Fair play. Right, let's move on to the front pages. The Daily Mail goes with dozens of under-5s referred to NHS gender service. The Guardian